Questions without notice. I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister clearly promised Australian families before the last election no family will be worse off, and that he had, and I quote, lasting plans for cheaper mortgages and better pay. With the typical Australian family now $25,000 worse off since Labor was elected, why won't the Prime Minister apologise for misleading Australians into thinking life would be easier under Labor?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question.
Member for Deakin.
And I note that the RBA Governor, Philip Lowe, has appeared at Senate estimates just this morning. And prior to the appearance, the Leader of the Opposition's deputy said this about Governor Lowe is a straight shooter, and I'm sure he'll tell it as it is. And indeed, he has done that across a range of areas in which the government is delivering. This is what the Governor had to say this morning. He said, I don't think—
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the member for Deakin, will cease interjecting.
I don't think that the budget is adding to inflation. It's actually reducing inflation. That's what the Governor had to say of the Reserve Bank after that glowing endorsement, by the Deputy Leader just this morning. They went on to say this. The government has got a lot of extra revenue, improved our public finances. That's fantastic. It could have elected to use this revenue to increase spending, but it didn't do that. I wonder who the Governor was thinking of, eh? I wonder. He wouldn't have had to think back too far. He would have just had to think back to the 2022 budget handed down by the Coalition, which was handed down in the context of the highest quarterly inflation of 2.1% this century. That's what they presided over. Now, he went on again to say this. The fact that it did not recycle that money back into the economy, that is withdrawing stimulus that otherwise could have been injected, and that's helpful. If that money had been recycled back into the economy, we would be facing yet higher interest rates. So it's fair to say we had very responsible action by the government. Very responsible action by the government. He went on as well to endorse the actions that we've taken on energy. The energy price caps in electricity and gas have roughly taken 0.5% of inflation over the next calendar year, and then the rebates will take another 0.25% off. The combination of those measures is reducing inflation by 0.75%. There it is, the Governor of the Reserve Bank, just after the fine endorsement by the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, making it very clear that Labor's responsible budget is making a positive difference, including the measures that were opposed by those opposite.
Give the call to the honourable member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Prime Minister. Earlier today, the House passed the Constitutional Alteration Bill. How will recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our Constitution move our country forward?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Robertson for his question and for his leadership as a fine new representative of the people of Robertson in this House, and for his leadership on this issue as well. 6 years ago at Uluru, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people invited all Australians to walk together toward a better future. The yes that we heard here this morning was a great step forward on that journey together as a nation. This referendum can be a moment of national unity, just as the apology was. An extraordinary opportunity for every Australian to be counted and heard, to own this change and be proud of it and truly live the spirit of the fair go. Today's progress is the result of a grassroots movement, the culmination of years of discussion, consultation and hard work by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. This is not something that began in Canberra this certainly has not been rushed into. It is a response to a gracious request from our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, an invitation built on a desire to bring us all closer together as a people reconciled and to lift our great nation to even greater heights. This referendum is about two things. It's about recognition in our constitution, something that other advanced economies that became colonies in past centuries did a long time ago. New Zealand way back in the 19th century, Canada in the last century. We are the only advanced economy that has not done that. It's also about listening. Indigenous Australians, when they met together at the First Nations Constitutional Convention, decided that they wanted not just recognition but the form of it. And the form they requested us to grant for them was a voice, an opportunity for us to listen to them about matters that affect their lives, about matters that go to the heart of the need to close the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. The voice is the means to an end. The end is about closing the gap. As the Solicitor General said, it will enhance our system of representative government. The Constitution Alteration Bill will now go to the Senate, and soon this extraordinary journey that began so far from Parliament will return to the people, and it will be the people who decide. Today, this House said yes to holding a referendum. We look forward to the Australian people saying yes to recognition.
Give the call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. This morning's monthly CPI release from the Australian Bureau of Statistics showed inflation has once again risen, higher than even the market expected. Will the Prime Minister finally take responsibility for this cost of living crisis that is hurting so many Australians?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Deputy Leader for her question. I congratulate her in calling out the Reserve Bank Governor for the straight shooter that he is this morning. And the Reserve Bank Governor has had a lot to say about inflation and about the issues that are there in the economy, including the global pressures that are there on inflation. But of course, the member would know that the highest quarter of inflation that has occurred this century was in the March 2022 quarter, the last full quarter in which those opposite presided over. The Reserve Bank Governor has made it very clear about the government's response. He has said this: "I don't think that the budget is adding to inflation. It is actually reducing inflation." That's pretty clear. That's a pretty clear statement. I don't know how it could have been more unequivocal than that.
Order. Member for Hunter.
The Governor was also asked, helpfully by the Shadow Finance Minister, I must say, asked some very good questions today. She said this: do you believe that not adding to inflation is still something that fiscal policy should be prioritising today? This is what the Governor said. Given my job is to get inflation down, that would be helpful, and I don't think the budget is adding to inflation. It's actually reducing inflation in the next financial year. Thank you, Senator Hume, for that question. Thank you. They've made it very clear. So those opposite like to talk down the Australian economy. They like to talk down the positive future that Australia has. We're getting on with the job of making a difference. Our budget that turned around what was predicted to be a $78 billion deficit and instead produced a forecast $4.2 billion surplus actually has a downward impact on inflation. I would have thought that was pretty obvious. The Governor knows it's pretty obvious, and I would have thought that those opposite should recognise that as well.
call to the honourable member for Chisholm.
Thank you so much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. How is the Albanese Labor government advancing its commitment to implement the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full?
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for Chisholm for her question and her enthusiasm in relation to this issue. Today, the House of Representatives passed the Constitution Alteration Bill without amendment. Today, we are one step closer to a referendum. Today, we are one step closer to recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our Constitution. 6 years ago, 250 First Nations leaders gathered at Uluru. They called for a voice and for Makarrata to oversee a process of truth-telling and agreement-making, expressed in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And last Friday, I had the opportunity to go to Munajulu to meet with leaders and with the local community. Uluru Katajuka and the land around them have always been very special places. The traditional owners, the Anangu, believe that the physical landscape of Uluru was shaped by ancestral beings who still exist today. And Uluru, that sacred rock, is at the very heart of Australia, and the Uluru Statement from the Heart. That gracious invitation, as the Prime Minister has said, to walk together to a better future. That historic First Nations consensus on our way forward. It guides us like the stars in the southern skies to a better future. A better future that is centred on making practical differences. I say that again, practical differences, because that is what the Voice will do. The Voice will make a practical difference. And here's why. For too long, governments have made policies for Indigenous Australians and not with Indigenous Australians. And for too long, that has contributed to the gap in life expectancy, the gap we all know so well, because a Voice will be an independent advisory body that can give advice to government and the parliament on the issues that affect communities. It's about listening. It's about making a difference. So I say to Australians, we have nothing to lose and everything to gain by supporting the Voice. It's time for recognition, it's time for a voice, and it's time to say yes.
Before I call the Leader of the Australian Greens, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is Mem Fox AM, much-loved children's book author and former South Australian Australian of the Year, and advised the House that this year is the 40th anniversary of her magical book, Possum Magic. And I give the call to the Leader of the Australian Greens.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Estimates hearings have revealed the enormous scope of the PwC scandal, including last night that the ATO reported evidence of PwC's conspiracy to defraud the Commonwealth to the AFP back in 2018. Meanwhile, PwC remains the governance and internal risk auditors for the AFP and Treasury and has made big donations to Labor and Liberal. Prime Minister, will you refer the growing PwC scandal to the National Anti-Corruption Commission when it begins in July?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Melbourne for his question, and I certainly agree with him that the breaches in confidentiality by PwC is an absolute scandal, and it is deeply troubling. And I'm sure that anyone who has a look at the details that have been revealed for those events that occurred, of course, back in 2018 and around then, when PwC was giving advice to the then government on multinational tax changes, finds these revelations shocking. The Treasury has referred the matter already to the Australian Federal Police. So it's gone well beyond the step that the member suggests already are there. The PwC breach did not arise as a result of an active procurement or Commonwealth contract. The Department of Finance has already taken a number of actions under the Commonwealth procurement framework to strengthen our systems following the disclosure of the PwC emails. These include PwC has been directed to stand down employees who were involved in or had knowledge of the tax matters from government contracts until the Switkowski investigation is completed and the department is satisfied that the direction can be lifted. New clauses will be included in the standard government procurement contracts to further strengthen the ability of the government to cancel these contracts in response to such behaviour in the future. Secretaries have been reminded that ethical behaviour must be taken into account as part of the value for money assessments which underpin decisions under the procurement framework. The government, of course, reserves the right to consider further changes if they are required. Can I conclude with this point to the member for Melbourne? One of the things that this government spoke about before we were elected was the reduction in the capacity of the public service to give that frank and fearless advice which is so required, and the increasing use of contractors. That is something which in the most recent budget we committed to further conversions of third-party workers, that is off public service to public service employment directly for critical jobs, including in defence, agriculture, Veterans Affairs and the ATO. We think that the context in which we made those commitments was certainly not around this, because I'm certain that members of the then government weren't aware of these details either. These revelations are indeed shocking, but they do point towards a policy failure as well, and that's one the government is addressing.
To be called to the honourable member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What did today's monthly inflation indicator reveal, and how is the Albanese Labor government responding to the inflation challenge in the economy?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Thank you to the outstanding member for Spence for his question about the cost of living pressures that people are facing right around Australia. Today the ABS did release the monthly CPI indicator, which rose by 6.8% over the 12 months to April. Now, this is a tick-up from the previous month's indicator, but it is well below the 8.4% peak it reached over the 12 months to December last year. As I said before, I think yesterday, Mr Speaker, as the Treasury Secretary said yesterday, we need to be careful about the monthly figure, which bounces around from month to month and can be volatile. But what we see in the data today is that the ABS is pointing out that the tick-up in the indicator this month is being largely driven by the changes to the timing of the fuel excise that impacted the indicator in April of last year. What is really clear, Mr Speaker, is that the peak in inflation is behind us. And while it has been higher than we'd like for longer than we'd like, it is expected to moderate over the year ahead, which is a point that the RBA Governor made today in his testimony. Now, this side of the House, Mr Speaker, does understand that Australians are under the pump with these cost of living pressures. It's why responding to the inflation challenge remains a central focus of the Albanese government's economic plan and the budget that we handed down earlier in May. It's why we delivered a responsible budget that struck the right balance between restraint and targeted cost of living relief so that we don't add to inflation pressures in the economy. And, Mr Speaker, the Governor of the Reserve Bank has said today, and he has said very, very, very clearly, that he doesn't think that the budget that was handed down from this dispatch box is adding to inflation. If anything, it's taking the pressure off inflation. And with that testimony this morning, Mr Speaker, the Reserve Bank Governor absolutely torpedoed the rubbish argument that has been peddled by those opposites since budget night. I mean, going around the country trying to get people to write that the budget's inflationary and it's going to put upward pressure on interest rates. The Reserve Bank Governor said today that his outlook for inflation and for interest rates has not changed as a consequence of the budget. It's taken some of the pressure off inflation in our economy, and that was the point of the budget.
Order.
The budget combined spending restraint with savings measures to try and get genuine value for money after a wasted decade of waste and rorts and economic mismanagement, and nowhere near enough to show for $1 trillion in debt.
The Treasurer will pause. I couldn't hear what the Treasurer was saying because there was far too much noise. But I want to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, on relevance, the Treasurer is a serial offender. The question was commendably tight, but the Treasurer could not restrain himself from going into the record of the previous government, which is not within the terms of the question or the answer. He should be directed back to the question.
I uphold that point of order. The question was not an opportunity for the Treasurer to compare and contrast. I just asked him to return back to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was asked about the inflationary pressures in the economy, and the wasted decade did not help when it came to the pressures that we inherited. Our budget combined cost of living relief, investment in the supply side of the economy. It was a responsible budget, and as the Governor has made clear today, it's taking the pressure off inflation, not adding to it.
Give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. In the gallery today is Jovan Rhodes, pharmacist from Nowra, along with 70 other concerned pharmacists from around the country. Hundreds of regional pharmacies like Mrs Rhodes face potential bankruptcy because of Labor's new 60-day dispensing policy. Will the government enter into a new agreement with pharmacists before this policy commences so that cost of living relief can be delivered without the risk of bankrupting community pharmacies?
I give the order. The member for Riverina. The minister will resume his seat. Order. The member for Macarthur is warned. The member for Riverina will cool his jets. Order. I want to hear the answer in silence and give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I welcome the pharmacists in the gallery here and the work that they do and the work that they did all through particularly the pandemic. They were the most accessible health service in almost all of our communities through 3 years. But I welcome a question about our commitment to cheaper. I welcome a question on our commitment to cheaper medicines. We are delivering on our commitment to make medicines cheaper for all Australians at a time of cost of living pressures hitting all people in Australia, particularly people who are reliant upon medicines, not just for 1 month because they have an infectious disease, but those patients who have chronic disease, patients who are on medicines for years and years, if not decades. But there is more to do, Mr Speaker. Although we have a strong record of cutting the price of medicines in just 12 months, there is more to do. So we did accept the advice of the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee that there could be 60 days of supply for 300 common medicines prescribed for chronic disease. And that is not new advice, because the former government received that advice 5 years ago about common medicines for chronic disease. And they decided in their wisdom,
The Minister for Infrastructure will cease interjecting. The Health Minister will just pause. It's far too much noise. The member for Page is now on a warning. The warnings won't be issued if that level of noise continues. I want to hear from the Leader of the Nationals.
Well, relevance, Mr Speaker. Relevance, Mr Speaker. This is about a renegotiation of agreement because this minister is taking 158.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. The Leader of the Nationals has abused the standing orders. The order. The question was about the changes that the government is making. The minister is being relevant. I'm listening to him carefully about the impact of these changes. Whoever is yawning there, can just remain silent. Order. Oh, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. The House will come to order so the minister can be heard in silence. He has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. As I was saying, this is not new advice. The Advisory Committee provided the same advice 5 years ago. The former government, in their wisdom, decided not to follow it, and as a result, millions of patients paid twice as much for their medicines than they otherwise had to. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars paid out by patients because the former government decided not to follow the advice of the experts. Now, we are following the advice of the experts. It will halve the cost of medicines for 6 million patients, which is why the Consumers Health Forum has supported our decision. The Heart Foundation, Diabetes Australia, Arthritis Australia, the Breast Cancer Network, every other patient group that has reported on this has supported our decision. It will halve the number of times those 6 million patients have to visit the GP, freeing up millions of GP visits every year that can go to other patients who are currently waiting to see their doctor, which is why every single doctors group had supported it. Now, I've said that every dollar saved by the Commonwealth from this measure will be reinvested into pharmacy, because on this side we support sustainable community pharmacy. And we are talking with all groups in the pharmacy sector, including the Pharmacy Guild, about the best way to make that investment, including, in particular, the impact on rural pharmacies. And I look forward to those discussions continuing.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition and the member for Riverina will cease interjecting immediately when the House comes to order. I'll hear from the member for Paterson.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence. What's being done to build Australia's standing in the Indo-Pacific and to play our part in protecting regional security and the rules-based international order?
Give the call to the Minister for Defence and the Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank the member for her question and acknowledge her commitment to the defence families of our country. On Monday, I represented Australia at the inaugural Korea-Pacific Leaders Summit in Seoul, which was a welcome step forward in Korea's engagement with the countries of the Pacific Island Forum, and I was able to hear from and speak with most of the Pacific's leaders. Security in the Pacific is grounded in the 2018 Boy Declaration, which has at its heart the idea that the Pacific's security should come from the Pacific family itself, which is a profoundly important principle. But of all the security threats which are faced by the countries of the Pacific, far and away the greatest is the existential threat of climate change which is faced by the countries of the Pacific, which is why the change in Australia's policy under the Albanese government of seeing our country put on a serious path to net zero emissions by 2050 has completely transformed our relationship with the countries of the Pacific, which is so important in terms of our own national security. Now, Mr Speaker, yesterday I met with President Yoon of Korea and Defence Minister Jong-sop Lee. In November, Korea published its own Indo-Pacific strategy, and seen alongside the Defence Strategic Review and our government's response to it, it is really remarkable the similarity in the way in which both of our countries are seeing the world, because we both understand that our respective nations' security lies in the collective security of the region in which we live and the maintenance of the global rules-based order within that region. Now, we have a huge economic relationship with Korea. They are our fourth largest trading partner. And so yesterday, Minister Lee and I decided that the 2011 Defence MOU, which underpins our defence relationship, should be revitalised but more significantly upgraded so that our defence partnership reflects the significance of our overall bilateral relationship. And he and I will have an opportunity to meet on a number of occasions now over the next coming months to pursue this, the first of which will be this weekend at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. And the keynote speaker at that dialogue is the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister and I are heading off to Singapore tomorrow.
Order.
And this affirms the seriousness with which Australia is now being taken within the world. When we came to office just over a year ago,
Order.
Australia was drifting in a sea of broken relationships. But over the last 12 months, all of that
Order.
has changed
The Deputy
as Australia has
Prime
taken
Minister's
its rightful
concluded.
place of...
The time has concluded. Order. Members on my left, Leader of the Opposition will be heard in silence, and I give him the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, what's your message to the pharmacists in the gallery today?
The member for McEwen is warned. Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. My message to the pharmacists in the gallery today is good on you. Good on you
Order.
for the work that you do.
Order.
Good on you for the work that you do.
The Leader
in
of the
community.
Opposition has asked his
That
question.
is one of the reasons
Members on my
why
left.
we argued during the pandemic that the pharmacists should do more. Should do
Order.
more. Should do more, but those opposite
Order.
held back. Held back. Left them on the bench. They could have been used to
Order.
assist with vaccines. And I don't know if my friend Adele is up there today.
Order.
She's up there. My friend Adele Tahan is there. She's the vice president of the Pharmacy Guild. I met with Adele in my electorate office because, as a good local member, I still represent the people of Greenlaw. And I had a very constructive chat with Adele. Her pharmacy at Rozelle does an extraordinary work looking after. I can see you. I can see you. And good luck with the twins, Adele. Good luck with the twins, and congratulations on their birth. Because one of the things that I understand with small business is that people like Adele Tahan and my local pharmacy across the road from my electorate office in Marrickville Road.
Order. Whilst there is far too much noise on my right, the Prime Minister is being relevant by directly acknowledging in the gallery. I'm not sure if this is on relevance. I'll hear from the Leader.
Well, Mr Speaker, it is on relevance. The Prime Minister has ripped $160,000 out of pharmacists.
Resume your seat. Order. Order. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting immediately. The Leader of the Opposition took your point of order out of respect for the office you hold. I'm going to hear from the Leader of the House.
Speaker, I just raised that it was a deliberately frivolous point of order, that his response was then out of order, and then he continued to interject from out of his seat.
Order. The Leader of the Opposition gets a lot of latitude, but simply getting up in this chamber and having a free-for-all is not on. The Prime Minister was asked a question about a message to people in the gallery. He was directly talking to people in the gallery. Order. By name. I'm not sure how more relevant he could be. Order. This is huge. This is a huge issue. Can we please order? That is having an impact on the House. I'm just going to ask the Prime Minister to be heard in silence out of respect for the office he holds.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. As I said, I respect the job that pharmacists do. I interact with them all the time. I regard them as people who, like the post office masters in the past, like the newsagents, people who service their local community and who I have had a long contact with. And that is
the Leader of the Nationals. If he says one more thing, we'll leave the chamber.
And that is why, when we considered this measure, that was the subject of vast consultation between the government and the pharmacy bill.
Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting. Order. The Prime Minister will continue his answer in silence.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. That is why we made sure that every single dollar that the Commonwealth will benefit from goes back into community pharmacy. And I've had discussions.
Order. Members on my left. Members on my left, this is not acceptable, this response. Further action will be taken if this behaviour continues. We're going to move to the next question. The time is now concluded. Give a call to the member for Blair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Small Business. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting small businesses, and what have been the challenges to delivery?
Give a call to the Minister for Small Business, the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness. Order.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Blair for his question.
The member for Fairfax will leave the chamber.
I know that the member for Blair is a great representative of the local small businesses in his electorate, and we are supporting small businesses because we know that small businesses have been having a difficult few years and they've been having a tough time.
Order.
Which is why our budget has provided targeted support, Mr. Speaker, while not adding to inflation. We want to help small businesses, and we are save on their energy bills through the Small Business Energy Incentive and indeed through the targeted energy bill relief that we're delivering in partnership with the states and territories. We're making it easier for small businesses to invest and to grow, with cash flow support through the $20,000 instant asset write-off, Mr. Speaker.
Order.
We're ensuring that small businesses can innovate, invest and grow by providing that cash flow support. We're also ensuring that small businesses adopt and adapt to digital technology through the Industry Growth Plan, and we're helping them thrive online through the Digital Solutions Program, Mr. Speaker. We're also helping to protect small businesses from cyber security attacks through a new $23 million Cyber Wardens program. This program is a pilot that COSBO has developed with some private sector partners, but with content developed alongside the Australian Cyber Security Centre, Mr. Speaker. We're reducing the time that small businesses spend doing taxes. We're saving small businesses both time and money with these changes. We're also expanding the tax clinic program, Mr. Speaker, to support small businesses and individuals, and it was a great opportunity for me to be able to visit this in my home state of Tasmania to see how it's delivering critical support. Mr. Speaker, at every opportunity we have been saying yes to supporting small businesses. We've updated the Commonwealth procurement rules to give small businesses a bigger slice of the $70 billion that goes to tender each year. We've said yes to making unfair contract terms illegal, something those opposite talked about for a long time but in 9 years didn't get round to. We have legislated. We've supported small businesses in terms of being paid on time. We have a current review into the Payment Times Reporting Act. And importantly, we've also brought together the small business ministers from around the country who hadn't been brought together for more than 8 years, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that we can work across states and territories to support small businesses. But whilst we've been saying yes to small businesses, Mr. Speaker, those opposite have been saying no. They said no to the energy bill relief, the direct rebate for small businesses. They came in here and they voted against it, Mr. Speaker. They said no to the $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund that will support supply chain resilience for small businesses. They came in here again and they voted no, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, they did very little when it came to supporting small businesses when it comes to cyber security attacks. But we have already moved. They failed, as I said, to make unfair contract terms illegal. Mr. Speaker, they have done very little.
Has concluded. Give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister guarantee that under his 60-day dispensing rule, no pharmacist will be worse off?
Order. Give the call to the Order. I give the call to the Prime Minister. The Minister for Home Affairs will cease interjecting. So will the Treasurer. And the member for Page is on a warning.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I can guarantee that under our cheaper pharmaceuticals policy, 6 million Australians will be better off. 6 million Australians will be better off. We have questions at the beginning of question time about the cost of living, and then they stand up and say that people who have arthritis, people who have heart conditions, people who have diabetes should pay more for their medicine. That's what they say. That's what they say. That's what they say. Just like the only government that produced cheaper medicines for Australians in the history
Prime Minister
of the
will pause. I'll
pharmaceutical.
hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
You sitting down, Prime Minister?
Order. The Deputy Leader will proceed with the point of order without commentary.
My point of order is relevance, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is not answering the question about whether.
Order. The question was about the 60-day dispensing rule. The Prime Minister was being relevant, and I'll make sure he remains relevant for the remainder of his answer. The Prime Minister has the call.
The pharmacy sector makes a vital contribution to the health of their local community. They have my respect. I have sat down. I have sat down, including with Trent.
Order.
You wouldn't know. You would not know. I not only have sat down. You struggle to find the chamber, mate. So.
Order.
I have sat down.
Order.
I have sat down with the head of the Pharmacy Guild in Brisbane 2 weeks ago. I have sat down with the Vice President of the Pharmacy Guild in my electorate office just a couple of weeks ago. I'll continue to engage with community pharmacies, including in my own area, as will the Health Minister, because there will be, of course, and every member will, because every member here knows the important role that community pharmacists make. But what we won't do is ignore completely, which those opposite want us to do, the cost of living pressures on people who have a health condition that requires regular drug treatment for the rest of their lives. And why should they pay double than what they need to? Why should they? That's what those opposite have to ask. And they can be angry, Mr. Speaker. All this fake outrage from those opposite. What we are doing is we are delivering.
The member for Page and the Leader of the Nationals.
We are also, of course, engaged as the Minister. Will continue to be engaged with the Pharmacy Guild and with community pharmacies, but we'll be engaged. We'll be engaged in the interests of their customers as well.
Concluded. Give the call to the member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the budget carefully calibrated to address cost of living pressures in the economy?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to the wonderful member for Dunkley for her question. As we've acknowledged today and on many other occasions, we do understand on this side of the House that Australians are under the pump as a result of high inflation and interest rates which started rising before the election. And that's why our economic plan and the budget we delivered this month was carefully calibrated and designed to take pressure off the cost of living rather than adding to it. And the Reserve Bank Governor, as I said before, acknowledged that this morning, telling Senate estimates, and I quote, I don't think that the budget is adding to inflation. It's actually reducing inflation. Those are the words of the RBA Governor. He also backed the spending restraint that we showed in the budget as well. And he said, and again I'm quoting, "In the most recent budget, I was pleased that the government saved most of the upgrade in revenue, and the electricity price package is helping with inflation as well." And that's important, because if it knocks over 3/4 of a percentage point off inflation over the next financial year, that helps lower the headline inflation rate and helps contain inflation expectations, which we were talking about before, so that is helpful. And he went on to say, Mr Speaker, the budget, largely through the electricity price package, is taking pressure off inflation. The Reserve Bank Governor said that the budget hadn't changed the outlook for interest rates, telling estimates. We incorporated the broad parameters of the budget into our forecasts. We've got good liaison through the Treasury Secretary and the Treasurer. We understood the parameters of the budget, so it hasn't affected our outlook for the economy or for interest rates, Mr Speaker. Now, as I said before, this puts to an end for all time the ridiculous argument being put by those opposite about the budget's impact on inflation and interest rates. And they're very angry today, Mr Speaker. They're very angry because they've been sprung. They voted for higher electricity prices, and now they want to vote for higher medicine prices as well, Mr Speaker, and that will put upward pressure on cost of living rather than downward pressure.
Have you concluded your answer? The Manager of Opposition on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, again on relevance, the Treasurer has just done it again. It was a commendably tight question. He has wandered into matters that are outside the terms of the question, and he should be directed back to it.
The question was about the budget being calibrated to address cost of living pressures. I'll ask the Treasurer to return to his answer and make it relevant to that question.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The Reserve Bank Governor's testimony today torpedoed the ridiculous argument that the budget is putting upward pressure on inflation or interest rates when it isn't. In fact, as the Reserve Bank Governor said today, it's having the opposite effect. It's taking pressure off inflation, taking pressure off the cost of living. And in this parliament, people on both sides of the parliament had the opportunity. You could vote for taking some of the edge off electricity prices or voting for making them worse, taking some of the edge off medicine prices or making it worse. We know whose side we're on, Mr Speaker. We're in favour of taking the cost of living pressures off Australian families. That's why the budget was responsible and carefully calibrated and methodically delivered to take pressure off the cost of living in our economy rather than add to these inflationary pressures. And the Reserve Bank Governor has said in his opinion it's doing the job it's supposed to do.
With the call to the honourable member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. Tomorrow, more than 3 million Australians will see their student debt rise in line with inflation, adding more than $1,000 to the average loan, the highest increase in more than 3 decades and nearly double the rate of wages growth this year. So far, the minister has not acted to freeze debts ahead of the June 1 deadline. In this time of ongoing high inflation and economic uncertainty, the need for reform seems clear. What plans does the minister have to provide some relief to the millions of hard-working Australians copping this smackdown tomorrow?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for North Sydney for a question. Can I also recognise my friend, the great Mem Fox, who's in the gallery today, who's enriched the lives of millions of Australian children here in Australia and right around the world.
Order.
The short answer to your question is there are no changes to HECS or the indexation process in the budget. The changes we've made, the relief we're providing, is helping students with the cost of living by increasing youth allowance and AusStudy and rent assistance. A couple of important points to make here. Changing the way HECS is indexed doesn't put an extra dollar in the pocket of a university student today. It's not the way that HECS works. It's not like a mortgage. The amount that you pay back every year is based on your income. Now, I get that affordability is an issue, and that's why I've asked the Universities Accord team to look at this, along with a whole bunch of other serious issues in our university, in our higher education system. And I can advise the member that Professor Bruce Chapman, the architect of HECS, has been engaged by the Accord team to work with them on this. Going to university is important. Going to university is your ticket to the show. 9 out of 10 new jobs created today require you to go to TAFE or university.
Order.
TAFE or university. And going to university makes you money. The average income of someone with a university degree is about 94 grand. The average income today of somebody whose last year of education was year 12 is 68 grand. That's a big difference. That's a life-changing difference. And HECS has made that possible for millions and millions of Australians to get to university, to get that degree and to change their lives. But not everyone. In the member for Wentworth's electorate, 67% of young people aged 24 to 34 have a uni degree. But in the member for Rankin's electorate, it's only 19%. In the member for Melbourne's electorate, 69% of young adults have a university degree, but in the member for Longman's electorate, it's only 16%. And in the member for North Sydney's electorate, 71.3% of young adults have a university degree, but in the member for Spencer's electorate, it's only 15%. There is a cost to going to university, but what is the cost of those kids missing out? I don't want us to be a country where your chances in life depend on how rich your parents are, where you live or the colour of your skin. But these statistics tell us that that is where we are today, and that at its core is what the Universities Accord is all about.
Has the minister concluded his answer? The minister has concluded his answer. The member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How will the Albanese Labor government's plan for more affordable early childhood education benefit Australian families, including First Nations children?
Give the call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and the Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the wonderful member for Adelaide for his question and for his ongoing commitment to families and children in his electorate. Now, Mr. Speaker, in just over a month, a very small over a month, early childhood education and care will be more affordable for 1.2 million families in every single electorate across the nation, including 9,800 families in Adelaide, 10,800 families in the electorate of Lalor, 9,500 families in the electorate of Gellibrand, 9,400 in Bennelong, 9,200 in Rankin, 10,300 in Mitchell, and 8,300 families in North Sydney, and many more, including 265,000 families in rural and regional Australia. Cheaper early childhood education and care is not just good for the economy because it allows primary caregivers to take on more hours of work or go back to work. It's good for families who have faced increasing fees, often putting it out of their reach. But importantly, it's good for children. Now, we know that First Nations children are twice as likely to be developmentally vulnerable when they start school. But we also know that early learning plays a significant role in school readiness and outcomes for First Nations children. And that's why we introduced a base entitlement of 36 hours per fortnight of early childhood education and care for First Nations children, regardless of their family's activity. But we've also committed to 50 Connected Beginnings sites by 2025, and we are well on our way to achieving that. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I visited the Connected Beginnings site in Armidale with the member for Burt in his electorate and saw firsthand the difference that wraparound services that support families, that support a child's education, that support a child's health and their well-being has made to First Nations children right across the nation. We're doing this in partnership with SNAKE through the Early Childhood Care and Development Policy Partnership, which focuses on improving early childhood outcomes for First Nations children and their families. The Albanese Labor government is committed to ensuring that every child, no matter who they are, no matter what their background, no matter where they live, no matter what their postcode, can thrive and can get the best start in life, whether it's through more affordable early childhood education and care or whether through our support for First Nations children. This government has worked tirelessly to deliver our election commitments, and we will not stop, Mr. Speaker, because we know there is more to do.
Give the call to the member for Groom.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The last time a proposed constitutional change was put to Australians, a constitutional convention was held, the proposed republic model was agreed, and the public was given more than 18 months to consider the detail. Why is this Prime Minister asking Australians to first agree to put the voice permanently into the Constitution and then to give him 6 months to work out how it would work?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question. The First Nations Constitutional Convention was held at Uluru in 2017, just more than 6 years ago, and it was timed to commemorate the date of the 1967 referendum. That arose out of, originally, the proposal from John Howard as Prime Minister, who went to the election in 2007, saying that he would support a referendum on constitutional recognition. Then the Gillard government began a process with constitutional recognition working group that led to the process of people, including the member for Berowra and others like Noel Pearson, other senior legal commentators working on proposals, and then a series of consultations in the lead-up to the Uluru Statement, in the lead-up to that constitutional convention. When that occurred, then there was.
The member for Fisher will cease interjecting.
Then the former government, the coalition government, established a range of processes. Included in that was the parliamentary inquiry, which was jointly chaired by now Senator Patrick Dodson and the member for Berowra, that made recommendations. There was then a process set up, chaired by Tom Calma and Marcia Langton.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition is now officially warned, and the Prime Minister is going to be heard in silence.
That process then led to a report that went to the Cabinet of the Morrison government not once but twice. Not once but twice. This is a process that has been many, many years in the making, leading up to this process. We also, I note, established a time frame very clearly for people when I indicated that there would be a draft. I announced at Gama last July. We then had a process through a referendum working group that included people like Ken Wyatt, the former Minister for Indigenous Affairs, who came to a common position. It then went to the Parliament here. It's unfortunate that decisions were made, but they're entitled to do that before that process had even reported to this Parliament. The legislation will now go to the Senate, and then it will go to the Australian people. The Australian people will get to decide, and I certainly hope that they vote yes in the last quarter.
Give the call to the member for Macarthur.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Today is World No Tobacco Day. How is the Albanese Labor government reclaiming Australia's rightful position as a world leader on tobacco control?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, I thank the member for Macarthur, Mr Speaker, for his question. After Mal Washer left this building, the member for Macarthur spearheaded the entry of a number of doctors to this place, on our side particularly and on the crossbench, who, alongside with other health professionals in the House of Representatives, add real value to our deliberations on health policy. Tobacco is, as the member says, World No Tobacco Day. A reminder that in spite of the huge inroads made over many decades, tobacco use is still the leading cause, the preventable cause, of death and disability here in Australia. A reminder that still 2 million Australians today are daily smokers, with the vast majority of them, we know from research, still wanting to kick the habit. and a recognition, Mr Speaker, that we face emerging new challenges like vaping, a product deliberately designed to recruit a new generation to nicotine addiction. 10 years ago, Australia did lead the global fight against tobacco with visionary plain packaging and graphic health warning reforms, and they were hard fought. The Leader of the Opposition, who was Health Minister at the time, said they were a bridge too far, and Big Tobacco fought our reforms tooth and nail through courts. But we prevailed, Mr Speaker, and those reforms made a real difference. Dozens of countries around the world have followed Australia's lead, and today, here in Australia, there are 1 million fewer smokers than there were before those reforms. But, Mr Speaker, we know on this side of the House there is more to do, because while the former government was happy to bank a 152% increase in tobacco excise under their watch, none of that extra revenue was invested in new tobacco control investments. None of it whatsoever. And as a result, smoking rates have now flatlined. After decades of decline, smoking rates for the first time in decades have flatlined. Indeed, because of vaping, our youngest Australians are the only cohort in our community where smoking rates are actually increasing. Well, we on this side, Mr Speaker, are determined to stamp out the marketing strategies of Big Tobacco put in place to get around the reforms from a decade ago. The Vogue-style fashionable thin cigarettes, they will go. The menthol bombs and other flavours designed to make cigarettes more tasty, they will go. The brand names designed to mislead consumers, like Cool Crush, Fresh Burst, Smooth cigarettes, they will go as well. We are determined on this side to drive down smoking rates even further, Mr Speaker, and to prevent a whole new generation becoming addicted to nicotine. So today I have published draft legislation on our website to do just that. We are determined to have that legislation passed by the parliament. A decade ago, we had to get the Leader of the Opposition kicking and screaming onto the side of reform. I hope he comes to it quicker this time.
Give the call to the member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Speaker. To the Prime Minister. Australians are rightly concerned at the evident lack of integrity that's become apparent in the relationship between the Commonwealth and the consulting firm PwC. My question is twofold. Will the government suspend all current contracts with PwC while this situation is fully investigated? And will the government trigger an integrity review of Commonwealth relationships with all large private consultancy companies?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Goldstein for the question, and I refer to my previous answer to the member for Melbourne, in which I outlined the government's position on this. The breaches in confidentiality by PwC are indeed extraordinary, outrageous and deserving of complete condemnation, not just by the government but by all Australians, I believe. To have a brief that is then turned into an opportunity is what occurred here. And we, of course, the Treasurer has referred the matter to the Australian Federal Police. The PwC breach did not arise, I repeat, as a result of an active procurement or Commonwealth contract, which we have. I'm very concerned about it. I repeat that prior to the election, one of the things that we spoke about, and indeed there's been some criticism of an increase in use of the public service, but one of the things I want to do as Prime Minister is restore the public service to the primacy that it should be in. The public service should be the body that provides the primary advice to government, not the private sector, not any other interest, be it industrial, be it community groups. Everyone can have input into government policy through the political process, and that's important. But the fact that
the Prime Minister just will pause for a moment, and I'll hear from the Member for Goldstein on a point
Thank you,
of order.
Speaker. On relevance, the question went to an integrity review of all private companies consulting to the government.
The Prime Minister is answering the question, but he has a minute to continue with his answer, so I'll give him a call.
One of the things I said before was that secretaries have been reminded that ethical behaviour must be taken into account as part of the value for money assessments, which underpin any decisions under the procurement framework. What we've been about is restoring through the work that Gordon de Brouw did as well, and the work that we've done in reassessing the public service and how important it is.
Order. The member for Moncrieff and the member for New England and the Minister for Social Services will cease having a conversation across the chamber.
Thanks, Mr.
Prime Minister in continuation will be heard in silence.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I take these issues very seriously indeed. Very seriously indeed. Anything that we do, though, will not interfere with AFP investigations, as is appropriate. It is important that people be held to account, and sometimes you need to take a step back and allow those processes to occur. That is what the government is doing here. This is rightly troubling, but the government has taken very swift action as soon as we were made aware.
Give the call to the member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. How is the Albanese Labor government fixing the rollout of the National Broadband Network and delivering productivity benefits for Australian businesses?
Call to the Minister for... The member for Banks. I have been crystal clear about giving commentary when ministers are walking to the dispatch box. You'll leave the chamber under 94A. So it is a non-negotiable. If ministers are entitled to walk to the without commentary, groans, give the call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for her question and acknowledge her long-standing advocacy for her community to receive the best quality broadband. Labor, of course, founded the NBN with the purpose of providing fast, reliable and affordable broadband for all Australians. That's why we're investing $2.4 billion over 4 years to give an additional 1.5 million premises full fibre access, including almost 17,500 in the member for Corangamite's electorate alone. Our investment will also expand full fibre access to more than 660,000 additional regional homes and businesses that currently rely on copper wire. This will boost the reliability of services and the productivity of those businesses, and that supports remote work and learning and access to important services like telehealth. Mr. Speaker, the Albanese government understands the productivity benefits that are unleashed by the highest quality technologies, and unfortunately those benefits could not reach their full potential due to the poor technology choices made by the former government. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's just over a decade since the Coalition launched its disastrous broadband policy that promised a second-rate multi-technology mix for $29 billion, which blew out to $58 billion, a doubling of cost.
The minister will resume her seat. And I want to hear from the member for Petrie. Order. And everyone will be silent while he walks to the dispatch box as well. The member for Petrie on a point of order.
Thanks, Speaker. Just Standing Order 104, relevance. There was nothing in the question about opposition policies or what happened 10 years ago. Absolutely
nothing. Thank you, member for Petrie. The question was how is the government fixing the rollout of the NBN, which in the question itself implies there may be a compare and contrast. So I'm sure the minister is talking about fixing the NBN as part of the answer, and I'll give her the call. Order. But I'll make sure she remains relevant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that's because the decision to abandon fibre by those opposite was always about cheap politics and not about the future. Not about the future. And we know that productivity is supercharged by high-speed broadband that is underpinned by the best technology. So mind-boggling is it, Mr. Speaker, that the Liberals and Nationals purchased over 60,000 kilometres of new copper, enough to wrap around the planet Earth 1.5 times. But, Mr. Speaker, Labor is investing to expand the NBN fibre network because we believe in helping all Australians to reach their full potential through quality broadband. And we're continuing to see the benefits of improved productivity as more fibre is rolled out, delivering gigabit speeds to 90% of homes and businesses in the NBN fixed-line footprint by 2025. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, only a Labor government can be relied on to invest in the long-term infrastructure that Australians need, including in the NBN, to be globally competitive. But there is more to do, Mr. Speaker, including our continuing investments in the fixed wireless network, including our $480 million investment to upgrade that technology, trialling new uncapped satellite products to deliver faster internet in rural and regional areas. We're getting on with the job of delivering the highest quality broadband to all Australians.
Call to the Prime Minister.
I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Order. The member for Maribyrnong, the Minister for Social Order, Services Australia and the NDIS has asked to seek the call.
Yes, I seek leave. The member for Bradfield has misrepresented my actions as minister in today's media.
Order. Do you claim to be misrepresented, Minister?
Oh, I do.
I do. You may proceed.
I do. In today's Herald Sun, the chief weapon of the opposition, the member for Bradfield, said that he was worried that Services Australia and myself were not providing questions on notice answers to the opposition. And he goes on to say that they're going to grill the government today in Senate estimates. The Senate estimates session, however, has come and gone, and no one followed. No coalition senator raised it.
Order.
But just to put the opposition members' mind at ease, the opposition has asked over 900 questions on notice in my portfolio. Every one of them has been answered. In fact, my staff have answered 8,500 matters to do with Services Australia since being elected, some 22,000 matters all up in our portfolios, and furthermore, we have handled over 500 matters directly from opposition members. And I just finish on this note, Mr. Speaker. Opposition members raise legitimate issues about Services Australia and matters to do with their electorate, but it's very hard to fix your problems when the member for Bradfield keeps wasting our time.
Order. I present. Order. I present the. Order. If members can leave the House as quickly and as quietly as possible, please. I present the report of the Commonwealth Ombudsman's activities under Part 5 of the Australian Federal Police Act 1979 for the period 1 July 2021 to June 30, 2022, and I also present the following Auditor-General's audit reports for 2022 to 23, number 28, Performance Audit, Debt Management and Recovery in Services Australia, and number 29, Performance Audit, the Governments of the Andianka Land Council. I've received a letter from the honourable member for Mackellar proposing that a definite matter of public importance be submitted for discussion today, namely the urgent